Okay, for the presentation manual review, I'm going to pretend a little bit like I'm speaking directly to a client, but I'm going to go a little off script because I do know this is a training video. Before we get started, I want to say that this is the most important thing in all of training. You know, if you can follow this book, explain it well, know what's inside, judge your client, and kind of give them the more technical or less technical, more about the testimonials or the science, and less to kind of judge who they are and what kind of person you think they are, and then kind of give them the side of the manual that you think is the type of person you're with, then you're going to be very successful. So let's get right into it. So, first of all, electromagnetic radiation, EMFs. What are the most common sources of EMFs? Well, anything electric is an EMF. And we've had electricity around for many years, but the higher frequency radiation has gone ballistic in the last 10 years. That's cell phones. That's basically anything Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, such as the cell phones, laptop, smart meter, Wi-Fi, tablets, and so on. Solar panels, most people don't realize, are quite an issue as far as EMFs go too. Now, what are the effects of EMFs? And these are really symptoms. These are some of the most common: fatigue, sleep problems, chronic difficulties in concentration problems, focus problems, greater effects on children, headaches, immune system imbalances, and of course I'm just reading them right there in front of you. Evidence that for Alzheimer's disease, cancer, tumors, it's a major cause of autism, perhaps the most important cause of autism and main one, according to Dr. Martin Paul, who we'll get into later. And then finally, if somebody you're talking to doesn't have any of these symptoms, they're getting cell damage. They're getting DNA damage and free radical damage, according to many studies. I believe there's almost 50. I think there's 49 DNA studies to date saying that you're getting DNA damage from these waves at lower frequencies. So it's important to note, no symptoms doesn't mean you're okay. Now, I would like, before we move on, you can kind of see the title at the top. That's really the theme of what you're going to talk about. So make sure that you're welcome to say, is there proof that EMFs are harmful? Like, say the title and then explain right underneath of it based on that title. So let's do it. Is there proof that EMFs are harmful? Well, of course. There's over 10,000 studies proving that EMFs are harming people. And we know more about EMFs being harmful to people than, frankly, we know about smoking cigarettes being harmful to people, except for the cigarette industry went through this decades ago, and this is just getting started on EMFs. And the problem is, of course, EMFs are ingrained in every fabric of society, so it's going to be a lot tougher for this information to come out. So there's over 4,000 studies in one location. The bioinitiative.org, it's my favorite location because there's so many studies in one location. It's all scientists, environmental leaders. They don't sell products. There's no bias. They're not funded by anybody with an agenda. They've been doing it for way over 10 years, or well over 10 years now. So this is a great source. Tell people they can go to the website. I think they click on conclusions and then summary, and that's going to give them a lot of information. I think there's a report with 1,800 studies in it from 1 year. That's just great. They also come up with this electricity levels. If you go over 1 milligauss here of electricity, then adults are going to have biological effects according to the bioinitiative and their 4,000 studies. If children go over a half, then you have biological effects in children. Cell phone frequencies, Wi-Fi frequencies, Bluetooth frequencies, they're all called microwaves. Those levels, when they go over 30 microwatt per meter squared, which is what most of our meters are going to measure, then an adult has biological effects, and then 10 for kids. So use these levels as kind of our, quote unquote safe levels, because that's what the scientists are saying. Again, we know more about this than smoking. I'm going to skip some of the things you should definitely read everything, but I'm not necessarily going to speak about everything. And some things I'll elaborate a little more. So EMFs, let's get moving on. EMFs are labeled a carcinogen by numerous organizations. For years now, they've been labeled a type 2B, which is a possible carcinogen, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, as well as the World Health Organization, for quite a few years. Now, 2B, just so you know, is the same category as Roundup pesticides, lead, gasoline, and engine exhaust. It's now considered in more recent years a Group 1 known carcinogen, which is the top level, which everybody just assumes the jury's out and done and it's proven, by the bioinitiative scientists and a group in the UK called Power Watch, which is kind of like the environmental agency protecting people in the UK. Now, before I move on too, I'm going to elaborate and make this presentation most likely a little longer than you might on average, because I'm going to cover everything. But you might want to get the main points done in a presentation. Sometimes you got to cut it down to a short time because that's the time you have, and then you can let someone ask questions if they need to. And sometimes you'll elaborate because people are really into it, and you're going to have to judge as you go. So moving on. So we know there's proof that EMFs are harmful, and we didn't get into it yet. So there's proof, but how bad are they? So we know that's hurting people, but how bad really are they? First of all, a Swedish scientist has estimated in Modern Society that the microwave radiation levels about what our cell phones put out, the 2G, 3G area, have gone up a quintillion in a decade. That is so ridiculous. Nobody even knows what a quintillion is because it's such a ridiculously large number. That's a million trillions. That means our radiation in a microwave range and in the cell phone range of 3G has gone up about that much in a decade. Now, there was no experiment making sure this was safe before that happened. So basically that means we, the public, we're the experiment, and that's nuts, right? Next, the largest cell phone study ever done just concluded November 2018. It costs over $30 million. It was done by government agencies in the United States. So the National Toxicology Program here is an organization within the National Institute of Environmental Sciences, a government agency. So our government basically did the most expensive, longest study over 10 years in the history of cell phone studies, concluded that there's clear evidence here, clear evidence that these EMFs cause cancer in male rats and in mice. And I don't remember seeing it on the news. I mean, this is a huge story. It should be in the front page of the newspaper. It should be on every published, popular news station at night should have this. But the powers that be are trying real hard to sweep it under the rug, as we all know. Next point, children have 2 to 2.5 times the DNA damage that adults do. And here's just a question at the bottom that you can work in any time in your presentation if you feel like it's appropriate. If cell phones were using X-ray radiation to communicate, how many people would curb their use or just never use a cell phone? Everybody's going to say, well, yeah, I wouldn't use it at all, or I'd almost never use it unless it was a total emergency. Well, guess what? We're getting DNA damage as if X-rays were hurting us. We basically are doing that, and we're going to show that in a minute. So continue with how bad EMFs are today. Get ready to be blown a freaking way because this is amazing. It's scary. So you've probably already watched in training the video on Dr. Barry Trower. Learn how to explain it. You can even play this video for someone. I highly suggest it's you can play 2 to 4 minutes of it, and it's powerful. But when a woman is pregnant, she has let's say she hypothetically has a female fetus, a little girl, baby inside her belly. The first 100 days especially of that fetus, what will become the eggs are being developed, okay? So the eggs that she will be born with, all of her eggs the rest of her life, those eggs get 10 times the DNA damage they just do, and like he says, nobody knows why. these eggs that are getting 10 times the DNA damage of an adult also don't have the mechanisms yet, because it's a fetus growing these mechanisms. They don't have the mechanisms to repair the DNA damage as we do as adults. Luckily, most of our DNA repairs, so we're getting bombarded and just crushed by DNA damage, but most of it repairs. It causes aging. It can cause all kinds of health issues, but it's not as bad as it could be because we repair it. Well, these eggs aren't repairing it very well. So you times what we get by 10, then times it by much more than 10 because they don't repair. And what he's saying is that the second generation is where we're going to see the horrific results of this experiment on the public. Not us as much, and we are seeing evidence. And not our kids, which that's going to be worse, but the grandkids, that second generation, when they have kids, that's going to be a big problem. So when the kids have kids, the grandkids. So this is huge. This is like one of my main reasons that I am passionate to protect and help the world as much as we can by getting the heck away from it, or getting products like ours that remediate the EMFs. So moving on to the next study. This is like a drop the microphone study, as I always say. So a German professor, Franz Adelkofer, published this, but it was paid by the European Union, over $3 million study, and it went through 12 institutions. So it's not like one dude came up with these results. 12 different institutions across Europe decided in a 3 million something study that DNA damage was about the same. Get this, 24 hours on a cell phone was about the same as 1,600 chest x-rays. Holy moly. Again, if a couple of these crazy studies were published like they should be, the world would definitely be changing behavior, and of course in some countries they are. So why don't we know about these dangers? If it's this bad, why on earth would we not hear about it all the time? Well, obviously the wireless industry is spending a lot of money lobbying to keep the laws so that they can keep making their money. The FDA safe level is based on the ICNIRP, one organization only, and they concluded in 1994 that here's the safe level of EMFs, and the conclusion was based on things from the 80s, studies from the 80s. So our information is many decades old that's supposedly protecting us from EMFs. Now granted, in 1980s we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have Wi-Fi, we didn't have Bluetooth, we didn't have any of the problems today except for electric power lines, and we just barely introduced the microwave oven. So these levels are offensive, they're ridiculous. When the scientists say that 10 is safe and the FDA says 10 million, you can't even make it up. It's like a sci-fi movie. It's so ridiculous. And here's the bad part. Even though the FDA says the safe level is 10 million, and the FCC uses a level of SAR, that's how much radiation that you've already absorbed, which is acceptable to them, which is insane. Your cell phone still goes over these levels. So even though they set the levels ridiculously high, your cell phone is still exceeding even their ridiculous, absurd safety levels. If you read the small print when you sign up to turn your phone on in the very beginning, it says this is exceeding the levels, and you're supposed to hold your phone approximately an inch from your body at all times away from your body. Now, I don't know how you hold a phone away from you when it's called a touch screen and it's a phone, but that's apparently what they have written in the contract. You're not supposed to touch your cell phone. That's absurd. Now, when you touch your cell phone, you're going to absorb radiation and you're going to exceed the safety levels that are even ridiculous. And I will stop for a sec. At some point in the presentation, when I'm on stage or when you're with a client, when I'm speaking with anybody, I do like to let them know that as bad as this is, I do think it's fixable. I do think that we can have total peace of mind. I don't have any evidence to suggest otherwise. I always say I don't know what I don't know, but what I do know looks really, really promising, that we can literally have all this awesome, really cool technology that I use all of it. I use all these things that I'm saying are scary. But because we have products to remediate them, I feel comfortable. Now, maybe one day we'll find out that we missed a piece or something, but right now, boy, we have some strong evidence supporting that says we can have peace of mind. And by the way, that's exactly how you should word it. Um, to avoid any legal issues that you would ever encounter, you have to be so careful of getting sued for, putting salt on your sidewalk when it snows. I mean, you have to be careful about everything these days. So make sure you're saying the word address and remediate. So I would avoid the word protect, and I would certainly be a little bit careful who you're telling big, amazing testimonials to, because you'll sometimes get those too. So moving on. So even though we don't know about these dangers, the facts are coming out fast anyway. So far, over 40 countries have already passed federal laws banning Wi-Fi from schools, cell phones from schools, anything to do with these things in nurseries, and a lot of other things. Brussels, just in April of 2019, became the first major city to ban 5G for health reasons. That's what the politicians even use those words. So that's very cool. And I've heard lots of towns and parts of Portland, and a lot of people are doing the same thing or trying to. And you can read the other ones down there. So it's coming out, and this is going to be rapid and fast. A little simple science. Now we're going to get into the science. So how the heck does an EMF hurt you? What's really going on here? Because we used to think this was harmless for years. So what's really going on? We're going to keep it very layman term and simple for people. An EMF is basically a photon which carries energy, and it travels light speed. And as it does travel light speed, it has a force that oscillates up and down or back and forth as it travels. There's a magnetic and an electric force that oscillates back and forth. So as they oscillate back and forth, it creates a shaking and vibrating, and then particles also are smashing into each other. When this vibrating comes from man-made EMF sources, as it says here, we just call this shaking and vibrating subatomic chaos right there. That's the key. That's just a little kind of made-up new scientific word that we use to describe this stuff. When there's a lot of this shaking and vibrating or subatomic chaos, then it creates issues. Now, we're not going to cover this too in depth down here, but I put it small. You should know this stuff. There's many factors that can make an EMF cause more subatomic chaos, which is where the problem is going to be, as you'll see, or not have subatomic chaos, because some EMFs are, by scientists' estimation, not harmful at all. So what makes one harmful or not? One is polarization, which we'll describe in just a second. Another one is erraticism. Another one is the shape of a wave. Another one is front and back EMF. And I'll cover real fast. The erraticism is more like, is it an erratic or a very consistent or continuous wave? Wi-Fi, smart meters, a little bit on your cell phone. There's a very pulsing and erratic EMFs. So they create a lot more jolting, and the jolting is what the subatomic chaos comes from. The shape of the wave, there's actually waves that don't look like waves at all that are man-made. They have sharp edges. They make like a corner, like a square, instead of a rolling hill would look like. So that's going to affect it. And front and back EMF is from electric motors. Electric motors that spin are creating EMFs that are coming at you and pulling away from you at the same time. And it's theorized that when that happens, you have a circular motion of energy. And a circular motion of energy is going to make more problems. It's going to cause more chaos. And a little side note, and you don't have to don't say all this in every presentation, but know it in case you have to. But a router is probably a lot worse than a fan or an air purifier, which has the spinning electric motor, which you don't want by your bed. A router is probably much worse, but because of the nature of how the EMF is shaped and what's going on, our products can make the router okay when you're like inches from it usually, whereas a fan or an air purifier, the faster it spins, the worse it is, should still be like many feet from your bed, ideally way over 5 feet. Because the circular polarization or the front and back EMF from a fan is just harder to fix. Even though it's not quite as bad to begin with, it's harder to organize the chaos is what we're doing. So Again, don't know all that every time you go through one of these, but it's good to know. So, subatomic chaos. You should tell this to everybody. So this shaking and vibrating is where the issues are coming from. Because just like a microwave oven, it's not magic that it heats. It's shaking and vibrating because the walls hold all the photons inside. And they bounce off the walls and they create more and more shaking and more vibrating. And when they do that, they vibrate and molecules smash into each other, and then that friction creates the heat to heat your food. And the crazy news is your router, and this is point 2, the bad news here, your router, computers, and cell phone use the same frequency as your microwave oven, which is really good at shaking and vibrating water molecules, which guess what we're made of? Again, why do we pick this frequency to communicate? I don't know. There's a whole lot of other frequencies we could have used. So that's crazy. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all this stuff is pretty much in the worst range you could pick. Here's worse news, and we already covered this. Your cell phone and routers exceed the FDA and FCC safety limits. We already covered that. Just so you know, the subatomic chaos, we don't have to fix all of the subatomic chaos because the products don't do that. We just need to fix certain things in there, and that's proprietary, so I'm not going to get really specific. But just so you know, don't cover this in a presentation, but you know in small print, photon propagation, that's happening when the shaking and vibrating happens. In other words, a photon smashes into an electron or another particle. The electron absorbs the photon literally disappears, doesn't exist for a split second, then it spits it out as something new in a new direction. That's photon propagation. Wave interference, and you can Google this if you want, constructive and destructive. There's photon energy absorption, scattering, refraction, molecules smashing into other molecules, and a lot of stuff happening in this chaos, okay? We don't have to fix it all, but certain part in there is causing our reaction, which we'll get into in a minute. So another cool little fact, you don't have to cover every time because it'll be a long presentation, but the EMF from the sun, when you're standing outside, you're getting about the same exposure level of radiation as a cell phone at very high frequencies. Light is a super high frequency. So why would a cell phone damage us if this darn sun isn't? And the answer is that first one we covered on the previous page, right down the bottom here, polarization. So we're not going to explain everything to do with chaos, but we're going to explain that which you might want to show people briefly when you're going through this. So on the left side, nature versus the right side, man-made. So nature's EMFs are going to come off, generally, for the most part, balanced in all 360 degrees. And when they do that, one little photon flies by you and might pull you to the right. But if another photon flies by you at the same strength and pulls you to the left and up and down all at the same time, the net force is 0. So when you go out in the sun, this is similar to what's happening. It's balanced. It's not shaking and vibrating anything because it's very balanced. All the forces are balanced out. And so when you go out in the sun, what happens? You probably feel calm. That's what people do. They go to the beach. They have the negative ions of the ocean. They have the sun, which is calming, and they're at peace. They're at calm. If the sun was like a cell phone, we wouldn't probably have that going on. Now, a man-made EMF is polarizing. It's unbalanced and chaotic. It usually has a charge that goes back and forth, and that creates a lot of shaking and vibrating, and that creates the subatomic chaos and so on. This needs remediation. The sun, not so much. Not really at all. Now, polarization. All EMFs are definitely not created equal. Some are what scientists say are harmful, and some are what scientists say are not. So the incandescent light bulb is one of the only things in all the man-made EMFs that's more like nature. So an incandescent light bulb here on the left, this thing creates heat, and the heat comes off in all directions, and the EMFs are coming off in all directions pretty evenly balanced. Okay? Versus the CFL light bulb over here, the fluorescent light, has a charge going back and forth, and the EMFs are coming off very polarizing and chaotically coming off. So you may have an EMF meter that reads, like, let's say a milligauss meter measuring electricity. This may measure 15 and this measures 15. Both sides measure 15, but yet one doesn't need to be fixed on the left at all. You don't need product for it. The one on the right, you definitely want to remediate and do so, like get rid of it or have a product that you trust that works. So that's the difference. And you can ignore that. That's a repeat of the previous page down the bottom there. So why do I bring this up? One reason is because of what's in red. It says EMF meters are only one small part of the equation. So many people are focused so much on the EMF itself, and that is not where the problem lies. It's in the chaos that it causes. So in 2013, just about 6 years ago, Dr. Martin Paul, brilliant, awesome guy, made a discovery which helped shape the future of our company because it pointed us in the direction of where the problem is. If you don't know how EMF is hurting you, how the heck are you going to create a product to fix it? And there's a lot of theories out there, which you'll get later in training. But basically, he discovered this chart, an EMF, is causing the voltage-gated calcium channels to open on your cell, and it causes a host of problems. Okay, we, EMF Solutions, has found the missing link, we believe. Okay, we believe, we have a theory that this subatomic chaos right here, okay, this subatomic chaos is the missing link that we added to his diagram. This is his diagram otherwise. So when an EMF causes the shaking and vibrating, subatomic chaos, something about that, almost like a tuning fork, hit the right tune, and it opens up a door called a voltage-gated calcium channel on the membrane of potentially any cell in your body. Well, your membrane of your cells, it's like the round hole and the square hole, like when you put the pigs in, the little test that they give monkeys and so forth. Well, if you have a voltage-gated calcium channel, it's supposed to be shut unless you need a double ion calcium molecule in your cell to do some work. Now, once you have too much double ion calcium, this thing closes. Well, if it opens when it's not supposed to, up to 1 million calcium ions per channel per second can enter the cell. So when you're exposed to radiation that starts opening these VGCCs, you can have a lot of calcium and a lot of free radicals very quickly inside of your cell. And the free radicals, you can read his research, but it increases your nitric oxide. It does a host of other problems. The free radicals lead to the DNA damage, and that's where everything seems to come from. Why do we think this is everything? Because it explains everything in common sense. Okay? Not to mention, this explains all the symptoms that come out of EMFs. Not to mention, if you take a calcium channel blocker drug, and I've personally met people that do this that are EMF sensitive, their EMF symptoms go away. So, in conclusion, scientists, well, some, are pretty darn sure that this is the entire equation, the entire or almost the entire reason why an EMF at a low frequency could damage us. Okay, so what that means is if we can address it, we got a winner, and that's what we do. Our products are addressing not the EMF itself, because if you address the EMF, you can only block it. If you block it, we know that your phone stops working, your router stops working, your internet turns off. If you block it in your house, it could be bad, but you could also, like, don't get an FM radio anymore. Like everything, all technology is gone and stops if you're really blocking EMFs. So that's not a realistic solution. So if we address, and that's a great word, address the subatomic chaos properly, then the rest of this diagram ceases to exist. So in essence, you're living with the EMF, the cell phone, the Wi-Fi router, the cell tower, but you don't have to have these reactions if you can properly address that subatomic chaos. Of course, we believe we do. So, long story short, too, down here it says we need to stop looking at the EMF meter and the EMF itself, because that's not where the problem is. You look at the subatomic chaos instead. Now, how do the products work? For starters, anybody who's super into this science might be a little disappointed because we're going to explain the basics in layman terms, but it's proprietary. We have 11 products and material patents pending. So yes, we're not going to get into every detail and explain everything, but this is a really cool layman term way of understanding it. So here you got the EMF in the top diagram. An EMF going through a space is going to create forces that are jolting in random directions from all that shaking and oscillating. That opens up a voltage-gated calcium channel, as theorized and starting to be proven by Dr. Martin Pall and us and some others. And then that can lead to possible symptoms. Okay, get the unhappy family. Now, if you harmonize the subatomic chaos, and I tell people, if you put a magnet in this room, then forces would want to line up in that room. So when an EMF tries to travel right by a magnet, they're smoothing that chaos out. Instead of having forces jolting in all different directions, they're going to want to go in the direction of north and south, or whatever that magnet's trying to push and pull in. So if you smooth out that chaos, you can, in essence, theoretically stop our reaction, and then you got potentially no symptoms. And I'm using careful words even on this training video, but that is how our products work. How do we create this field? We don't use magnetism. We don't use magnets. We have another field. As a matter of fact, we have 2 scientific properties that we'll one day come out and tell people about. But there's 2 things that go into our products, most of them. When they're both present, it works. When one's present, it's probably not going to work, and it could make it worse. It's a gamble. So we've actually learned a couple of things that I don't think anybody else in the universe has learned. Thank you to the big man above. But anyway, that's a basic understanding explanation. So next, how do we know our products work? There's 7 different ways. I don't get into these all. I just say, we've done multiple tests. We have to test a person because we're not blocking an EMF. And this is so important when you're first learning to train here. We don't block EMFs, therefore the meters are not going to change with and without our products. A lot of people have that question, they forget, and they ask again later, and you have to remind them that we are not affecting and blocking the EMF itself. We're affecting the field that the EMF travels through, in essence stopping the chaos, which stops our reaction. The meter's only going to measure how much radiation, not what kind it is, if it's polarizing, if it's erratic, if it's pulsing. It's not going to measure all the factors that make it bad. It's just going to measure how much is there. So the meter's only the only reason we really have them is to show people how much of this invisible toxic junk is around us, because you can't see it. So it's neat to see a meter screaming at you to say, oh yeah, it's here. That's the reason we use it. Okay, so 7 ways. Blood microscopy testing, that's the only one I need. I lie. That and number 7 are just amazing. So the other ones are cool. Thermal imaging tests, Accugraph and Avatar. Briefly, the Accugraph and Avatar are similar. It's like a muscle testing device with a machine. We did mold testing, which I'm tending not to cover very much because bread is finicky about where mold starts growing on it. And if people start throwing bread and doing their own tests, they occasionally are going to get the wrong result just because how mold grows on bread. So we'll have to do it in a lab, in a Faraday cage, and do it again so that's easy to reproduce. But it's an awesome test. Muscle testing. So if you don't use it, fine. If you do use it, that's one more way that some people absolutely love to see our products working. And then testimonials, which is by far my favorite because it makes my day every time I hear one. So this I don't usually cover it unless people ask, but this is a 2-minute clip from, and I think it's in training, but this is 3 people's healthy looking blood cells. Don't get into medical explanations, because unless you're a medical doctor, even then I don't think they AMA likes you commenting on this stuff. But basically these are red blood cells under a microscope, and they should be round and spaced apart and moving around if they're going to be quote unquote normal looking. And if you go 2 minutes in front of a smart meter 1 foot away, he explains that broken cell walls, misshapen cells, and super sticking together, which is called rouleau, happens. We have never seen this, or very little of this. These two, this is common, and this is the absolute most common, the rouleau, the sticking of cells together. And here's the problem with this, which if your cells are stuck together, we know that one red blood cell at a time fits through a capillary. That's everybody knows in basic biology class. Well, if they're all stuck together, if 10 are all clumped together and stuck on each other, how are they going to fit through that capillary? Is it any wonder that people have focus problems? Well, if your blood's not circulating through the capillaries in your head and you have less oxygen to your brain, it's kind of like well, of course, what do we expect is going to happen? Is that going to affect headaches? Well, there's common sense. I think, why not? I mean, I'm not being a medical doctor here. I'm just saying this is what the experts are saying is going on. And so let's move on. So this is one example. We've done them various times. We did one more recently just to go back and forth so you can see. The first slide, this was a lady who came in for a test, and she was on her cell phone. And when she was on her cell phone, her blood already started sticking together and having some white centers, which is called, I was told by the gentleman who did ours that it's that could be glucose inside trying to heal the free radical damage, but that's another thing. But you can see that they're stuck together. They're not looking too great. The next one is on a phone call with our chip on it, cell chip. Her blood actually improved. Now you see cells by themselves, which is supposed to be like it is. So this has happened to numerous people multiple times where they use our product and they literally get better by being exposed to cell phone radiation because our product's on there. Then we did a 3-minute call, and these are all back-to-back, same person, back-to-back, same day. And then immediately into a 3-minute call without our device on it, without the cell chip on there, and then look what happens. Just looks like a mess. And then 3-minute call again, using the cell chip again, and you can see it. We could go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, I'm sure. And it would just keep going the same, so it's pretty cool. This is somebody in front of a smart meter. We just want to show different results. This is before. This is 2 minutes in front of a smart meter, but having our device on the meter. I think it was a home harmonizer sitting right on top of the meter. That's all it was. And then this is what happened 2 minutes not having a device on the meter. So same person, same day, just minutes apart. And then this is under power lines, and I threw this in because this is me. I've done all these, got the same result, by the way. I've done all our different tests and got the same results, but I just figured I'd throw one of mine in. This is me under power lines. I'm actually across train tracks from power lines, but they were pretty big ones. And this is before. This is with the Personal Card XL. It was called patch back then. This is with wearing the patch for a couple of minutes out under the power lines or near them. And this is me. All of a sudden, I don't look too healthy on my blood anymore. So this is me 2 minutes without anything on my phone. And then the same thing. This is one more person, and this is one of our reps. So we kind of used hers for a while. I just kept it in there. But she went to her chiropractor. This is her in her chiropractor's office. And I imagine because the Wi-Fi wasn't fixed in there, like in ours, the first blood test here and here were good because we remediated the office. And so everybody was sitting in a remediated environment, and so everybody's blood started looking good. She started not looking too great. Got on her phone for 2 minutes, and you see it got better, and then 2 minutes without the product, and then, of course, wow, not good. This is thermal imaging tests. You can be careful how you say it, but I still encourage people, if you're going to be on the phone a long time, use speakerphone or the headphones that plug in, not Bluetooth, of course. Because some people after 7.5 minutes to 10 minutes show a little thermal effect. This person showed none in 10 minutes with our product. Everybody experienced a lot of thermal image increase in heat that did a 10-minute call. Every 2.5 minutes, this person and everybody else that we tested just kind of gets worse and worse and worse every 2.5 minutes. And the worst being hotter and hotter. This may be an indication that the cell phone is the same basic frequency as your microwave oven, that this may be shaking the molecules in this person's head, smashing them into each other, creating friction and heat. That sounds pretty nasty to do to my brain. And if that's what's happening to our neck, our head, and everywhere around the cell phone, is it a giant wonder why there seems to be a lot more tumors around people's jaw areas, head areas, and so on? Kind of crazy. Okay, so the mold study. Now, mold produces 600 times more biotoxins when exposed to modern EMFs versus being in a Faraday cage, which is what blocks all EMFs. Most lab tests use Faraday cages so that they don't have external results affecting the results. We just repeated this. This is literally my router, pretty darn strong one, and this is 2 pieces of bread from the same loaf, organic, brand new after it came out. It's important so it's not moldy already. And we put a little squirt of water on each, put them in a bag, stuck them next to the router. This one has nothing under it. This one you can almost see has like an old product that's very similar to the Better Z's product, just sitting underneath of it. This got moldy in 3 days. 7 days got so nasty I had to throw it away. This, after 30 days, there's nothing. As a matter of fact, it went 60 days. It never got anything. By the time I threw it away, I didn't see any mold on it. So this is a very interesting experiment. It's been shown, how many people have mold issues in their house or mold issues in their body now. And if he's correct and mold is producing way more biotoxins because of our modern EMF problem, boy, that's another reason why to address this. Accugraph and Avatar studies. The Accugraph tests organ and gland acupuncture points. I don't ever explain this to people, almost. We got so much information. You can pick and choose what you explain to people. This is kind of not my favorite, and it's not necessary, but this device measures the nerve and energy flow, or at least theoretically the nerve and energy flow, going through an acupuncture point, and all these different organ and gland points. Like this would be, the first one might be, I can't read how small, but might be small intestine, stomach, large intestine, spleen, and so on and so on. So when we had people go in front, we did it with cell phones, we did it with smart meters. I forget which one this is, because again, I don't just talk about it very much, but you can read it. This particular one had, people were erratic and had a lower amount of theoretic nerve and energy flow going through their acupuncture points. And then when we did use the patch, which is now called Personal Card, we had increased amount of energy and a more balanced amount of energy going through the different organs. So that's cool. And then quantum reflex analysis. That's just Premier Research Lab's term for muscle testing. I highly encourage you to learn how to do this, because when somebody likes this, they really like it. Some people are totally sold because their muscles go weak with their cell phone, and then strong when our patch is on it, or our EMF chip is on it. So that's really cool. And then kind of to sum it up, this is the last of the ways I believe our products prove that they work. And this is absolutely the most fun. And there's so many testimonials that there's no possible way that this is placebo, for starters. And second of all, people like Matt, his 1-year-old, not even less than 1-year-old son, experiencing an overnight result of having just horrible phlegm and sinus issues for months, just disappear the next morning after we remediated his home. And first night his son has ever slept all the way through the night, and then after that started doing that. Things like this. The son didn't know we fixed the house. I've had husbands and wives do the same thing. It's just so awesome. I so wish we could produce all of our testimonials. When I was fixing homes in 2017, for a good part of the year I was working almost full time, and I got over 100 testimonials. Over 100. That's insane. That's awesome. That means our stuff, it's so common to have a testimonial, but I make sure you always tell people, even if it's almost half the people get a testimonial, if you don't, it still works. If you don't see like better sleep, more energy, and a host of other awesome things I can't get into, if you don't see these things, if all you're doing is preventing future problems, isn't that worth it? Isn't that great? So don't worry if you don't feel it. I like to point out that this person, Kathy, one of our reps, she didn't feel it when we fixed her home. She did nothing. She had no testimonial. But then she went to her chiropractor, who did the same blood tests as we've done. She saw how messed up her blood got on in exposure to a cell phone, but not at all. Actually, the opposite when our chip was on it. She quickly became a fan. She didn't need to experience it anymore, because she's like, oh, wow, that's awesome. So you don't need to experience a positive result. So make sure you tell people that, because we don't want people returning products every time they don't feel it, because literally half the people will return the products. But it is awesome. So I explain to people, we don't cure anything, we don't fix anything. What we do is we remove a huge, gigantic, epidemic, biblical level of electromagnetic frequency stress off your body. And when you do that, your body has all of a sudden one day given all this extra energy it didn't have yesterday. And what your body does with that energy is going to be different from person to person, because your body's going to use that for its priority. So one person might apply that energy towards digestion. Another one applies it towards repairing at night and sleeping better. Another one applies it to the immune system, maybe. So we don't know the result after we fix a home. We don't know what somebody's going to go through. Some people have had headaches for years, have gone away first night we fixed their home. We remediated everything. Some took 2 or 3 months. We've had all kinds of wild, cool stuff. But don't focus just on the symptoms. Make sure your people don't do that. And then from here on out, it's just a bunch of studies that you can read if you want. I don't cover them ever in a presentation, but just read them once or twice and just know some of the extra stuff that's out there. And that wraps it up. So thanks for listening.